Now again, in this picture, this is Isha Das, Craig Bullock. He's the speaker who will be with us 2 p.m. Eastern Time today, and also the director of the Assisi Institute, which again we'll be doing a live in-person retreat at in September of 2021, for those of you who might be listening to this after the fact. I saw this quote of his, and I thought it was brilliant. If you want to be free, then give up your fear of suffering. If you want to be free, then give up your fear of suffering. Now, this might seem like a hard right turn compared to all the stuff we've been talking about, but it's really not, because suffering is a part of life. Change, the difference is we don't have to identify with it. As I mentioned, you're going to get sick at some point. People are going to die at some point. People are going to leave you at some point. Things are going to break. You're going to get a new car. The culture that you live in is going to take a hard right turn, and you're going to wonder how you even relate to your family members with their political ideologies. You name it. Something's going to happen. It's just the nature of life. It's just the way it goes. And so most of us try to practice yoga and meditation and spirituality to stop that. But that's not something, you can't stop the wheels of nature. But through yoga, you start to recognize that you are not subject to your car dying. Well, your car dies. Great. That's not you. You get a new car. You move on. Your friends come and they go. You recognize you're not your friends. You persist. You let go of the attachment. But that doesn't mean that when your friends leave or someone dies or you are unhealthy in some reason, it doesn't mean that you don't get frustrated, or it doesn't mean that you don't grieve or you don't have sadness, because that's natural. The trouble is when you identify with it, when you define yourself through it. And I've been guilty of that. After Melissa passed, I was so engrossed in that suffering and in that grieving. That's all I knew. I knew deep down inside I had to move beyond it. It didn't mean I was going to dishonor the experience, but I let my body feel the grief. I let my mind feel the rage and the sadness. I let it all out, all the while recognizing that it's part of life. And so if you want to be free, then you give up your fear of suffering. When suffering comes, you don't hold on to it in the sense that you try to complain about it to everyone and define yourself by it. But if you're feeling sad, if you're having heartbreak, just feel it. But also be aware of letting it pass, not holding on to it. Eventually things change and you feel better, because you're always going to have this up and this down. And if you begin to not fear suffering anymore, the amount of freedom you experience becomes, it's mind-boggling. I wish I could explain it. And I wish I could say more about this. So I'm just going to let you sit with it for a little while and come back to it maybe. Write this down. If you want to be free, then give up your fear of suffering. Ramana Maharshi. How does yoga and meditation free us from karma? Freedom is only knowing the self within yourself. Concentrate and you will get it. Your mind is the cycle of births and deaths. It is your mind that creates all the attachments. And so, through the practice of yoga, as I keep saying, and as we've heard again and again, it is learning to redirect yourself back to that witnessing presence. And it is not easy. I mean, actually, it's the easiest thing you can do, but most people's experience, mine as well, is that it takes consistent concentration until you get the hang of it. Because when you're so addicted to all this stuff around here, it's all you know. You have to, little bit by bit, go in and have that glimpse of that clearer reality. And every time you go and you catch a glimpse, you start to trust it a little bit more. Oh, okay, well, maybe it is real. And as the years go by, you start to recognize, maybe it is the actual real thing, until eventually you're able to sink your awareness inward through the practice of yoga repeatedly, and then you don't pay attention to the mind anymore. You still use it to balance your checkbook if you still got a checkbook. You still use it to calculate your taxes. You still use it to plan a house. You still use it to think, would this person be right to participate in this with me? You still use it for those kinds of things, but you don't identify with it. I think all kinds of things. Some stuff I wonder, where did that come from? And when I'm committed to doing something, all this stuff might come up about why I don't want to do it. Well, after all this time of being able to experience this idea of being the self, I recognize I don't have to listen to it. So it can chatter and talk all at once, and I'm still going to say, I don't care, I'm still going to go do this thing. And you learn that the mind has its place, but you don't have to pay attention to it. And the more that happens, the more you start to sink your attention into this idea of the self, to concentrate on the self and hold it there. And from the Bhagavad Gita, to action alone hast thou a right, and never at all to its fruits. Let not the fruits of action be thy motive, neither let there be any attachment to inaction. And this is the hardest thing to get for a yogi. It takes time, it takes practice, it takes contemplation, it takes paying attention to living. Life is going to happen. You're going to get up in the morning, and you're going to go to the fridge and you're going to say, well, am I going to eat some toast and avocados, or am I going to eat eggs? And you just sit there and find, I'm going to eat eggs. You just do it. You eat the eggs. You just follow the path of life. You sit and you contemplate. And if you are attuned to this inner self, you decide, what am I going to do today for work? And if you are attuned to the inner self, not all the distractions, not all the silly little conditioning, which is hard to get through, but you do in time. Okay, I'm going to undertake this project today, or I'm going to call this person, or I'm going to do this thing. You don't know where that's going to lead you, but you are attuned to the self and you follow it. So the hardest part to move beyond karma is to let go of attachment to your motivations. You do your best because it's what you are inspired to do based on the principles of yoga, and you let go of the rest. You let go of the rest. And you never know how it's going to work. And again, Laurel used this example the other day. It's one I've heard before. Many people have used it. The farmer who gets a new horse, and all of his neighbors say, oh, how lucky you must be. You've had the money to get a new horse. He says, well, we'll see. And then the horse gets away. Oh, what a terrible thing. You lost the horse. You just got all that money down the drain. The farmer says, well, I don't know. It's too late. It's too early to tell what's going to happen. Then the horse comes back and he brings a mare with it and a colt, and he brings more horses with it. And all the neighbors say, wow, that's such good fortune. You had one horse, now you have multiple horses. And he says, well, it's too early to tell. And then his son is trying to break one of the new horses, and he falls and he hurts his hip and he has a limp now. And the neighbors say, oh, terrible, now your son can't do any work. It's a horrible thing. And the farmer says, well, it's too early to tell. And then the army comes through conscripting soldiers. And they can't conscript the son because he's got a limp. And of course it goes on. What a wonderful thing. Your son doesn't have to go off to war and get shot. So you see, the hardest part of all this is recognizing the mystery of life, that we cannot appreciate or understand the why of why everything happens, good, bad, or otherwise. We can't. And learning to embrace that mystery is our path. And we are anchored in the practices of yoga, truthfulness, harmlessness, contentment. The reason they're so important is because as long as you live your life following those principles, that's the only thing you're supposed to do, not for any other reason than for their own sake. Then whatever happens, it's not up to you. It's up to this infinite consciousness, which is the real you. And then your life proceeds as it's supposed to. And you might end up in a ditch. You might be celebrated across the globe. It doesn't matter. The important thing is what is going on within you. And it is the practice of yoga which helps you abide in that state. So, just like I want you to contemplate, if you want to be free, then give up your fear of suffering on your own. Well, you also need to contemplate very deeply. And this took me years, okay? I'm saying that to you so you're not thinking this is something you're going to sit down and figure out in a day or two. I meditated upon this for a long time. To action alone hast thou a right, and never at all to its fruits. Let not the fruits of action be thy motive, neither let there be in thee any attachment to inaction. Now, how hard is this to do? We're nearing the end, and then we'll take some questions, but I thought this was a nice way of understanding this. In the book that I mentioned I was listening to yesterday, one of Ramana Maharshi's books being read out loud, Ramana Maharshi said that there are three kinds of aspirants, three kinds of people who are figuring this out. And they're like either gunpowder, charcoal, or wet firewood. We have an image here of a monk. I thought this was great. I Googled gunpowder, and for some reason I find a monk running away from something being blown up. We have an image of a monk running away from an explosion. And there are individuals who are like gunpowder. And in order to ignite gunpowder, it just takes a spark. Just bam, boom, it's understood. They know how to start practicing yoga. They're committed to doing it, even though they might have a lot of changes to do. It's understood. They're committed. They're just doing it. The explosion happens. Or are you like charcoal? Well, charcoal will light, but it takes more time. You have to really sometimes hold a match to it or put some other things to get it burning, but it eventually ignites. So it takes repeated exposure to these kinds of ideas before finally the charcoal ignites and it starts burning, becomes spiritually alive. And we're all different in this regard. Or are you like wet firewood? It doesn't matter if you are or not, because eventually you catch fire at some point in time. But many people are like wet firewood, in that they come back to yoga, they go away, they come back, they try to meditate, they try to do their best, they fall away, they go to sleep, they wake up. Years go by and they keep being pulled back to it, but they don't quite catch fire. It's like you're holding the match. If you've ever tried to light wet firewood, you know it takes a while. So you just got to keep putting that match to it, keep putting that fire to it until it smokes and it smolders and finally it catches. So the question is, how hard is it to do? It depends on you. Are you like gunpowder? Boom, ready to go. All it takes is someone to say, this is important. This is what you got to do. You say, great, I'm making all the changes today. It's going to be hard. It's going to be a struggle, but I'm doing it. Or are you like charcoal? You think about it a little bit. Well, it makes sense, but I'm not really sure I want to commit to letting go of attachment to these things I think are so important. But I'll try meditation, and I'll try to switch my diet, and I'll do my best. And it might take them many, many years until they finally recognize, this is why it's so important to let go of attachment. This is why it's so important to be truthful. This is why it's so important to understand contentment. Then the coals catch and things are on fire. Or are you like wet firewood, where you've got to come to the retreats, you've got to read the books, you've got to meet the teachers, and you've got to doubt it all the way. And you've got to think, I don't know about this. There's a part of me that thinks there's something to it, but I'm not sure. And it doesn't matter, though, because even though you've got the doubts, even though you keep coming back to it, doesn't matter how long it takes, eventually that wet firewood also catches. But this all boils down to, how hard is it to do? It simply depends on you. And you have to be consistent. Keep trying. Even if you're wet firewood, eventually you're going to catch fire. But it takes time. Now, yoga reveals the truth. Behavior reveals your experience. I wanted to share this because many people think that if you just practice yoga, everything's going to go right. Nothing ever is going to happen that's going to be bad or make you sad or anything like that. That's not true. What yoga does is it reveals the truth of what you are inside. That's it. Now, that will alter your outward experience, because if you're living a more inwardly centered life, you're less likely to make more problems for yourself. However, how you live your life is going to determine what your outward experience is. Yoga will help you make better decisions, certainly. But you're still going to be subject to genes. No matter how well you try to fix your gene expression, you still might roll the dice and get a bad roll. you still might be around people from time to time that make your behavior or your thoughts or your feelings experience a state of difficulty. So remember, yoga reveals the truth. It doesn't make you a superhuman. The people who promote that also promote a lot of self-sabotage, because you think, well, they're superhuman. They did it because they're superhuman. And then you think you can't do it, and so you don't. Well, they went through all this stuff too, believe me. So you practice your yoga to rise above, transcend, and realize the truth of what karma is. And then while you're doing that, you organize your life. You analyze your thoughts, your behaviors, your feelings. You make a plan to shift those thoughts, behaviors, and feelings to match what you want to experience. Again, it doesn't mean it's going to work out perfectly, but I guarantee you, if you start thinking a little differently, imagining you can be different, you're a heck of a lot more likely to have that positive experience. If you can imagine you can have a better work environment, you're much more likely to do the things, to make the choices, however hard they might be, to find that work environment versus being caught up in the idea of, oh, well, I can't do anything about it. So you see, we're not trying to teach magical thinking, but we are trying to allow you to understand that for the most part, you do have a bit more control than you might think, and it's worth it to engage that control to the best of your ability, to remain receptive to new ideas and new ways of being, and to follow the lead. You don't know where things are going to lead you. I, early on, said I want to be completely awake and I want to be completely free of all of my karma. I was enthusiastic about that. I meant it. I really meant it. I was 19, 20, somewhere around there, and I went out in the woods and I fasted and I made this declaration. Now, did I know that in order to experience that, I was going to have to watch my wife, whom I've known since I was 16 and loved that whole time, die in front of me so that I would lose my attachment to a body of someone of a loved one? Did I know that I was going to have my house roll down a hill and fall in a river so I would lose my attachment to home? Did I know I was going to have to move from a very supportive, loving community back to my hometown, which I couldn't even imagine I would ever do, so that I would experience a deeper sense of community and connection with the people I've met here? Did I know all that was going to happen when I made that statement? No. Had someone told me that was going to happen when I was 20, would I have made that statement? Probably not. But I made that statement, and life happened. And I learned meditation. I learned all these positive things, and I learned how to heal. But I also had to go through these other experiences so that it became absolutely pristinely clear as to what was real and what was not real. So when you're doing this, you want to be receptive to the changes that occur and follow it, because you never know where it's going to lead. But I gritted my teeth, I cried, I meditated, I rolled the dice, and I saw what happened. And sometimes we have to do these things. So you may be the architect of your own experience for the most part, but you can't quite control the specifics of it all, and you have to be willing to roll with it. You have to be willing to flow with it. Now, 2 final considerations. And those of you who want to hang around and I'll answer these questions. I know we're getting towards the end of our time. I'll do that for a few more minutes. I really didn't expect this to go that long, but it's the way it works. So 2 final considerations. Karma is contagious. You will tend to behave and think like those people you spend the most time with mentally and physically. You will tend to share experiences with these individuals. Remember, the model of karma we tend to think of is there's this linear progression of you go from here to there, lifetime to lifetime. But if we think of it as we are this one infinite consciousness, it's much easier to understand how karma is contagious. When you are around people who think poorly of themselves, who don't have good boundaries, who don't aspire to be anything more than their collection of quirks, idiosyncrasies, sorrows, and desires, that's what you're going to tend to think and be like. When you're around people who are motivated, who feel a draw towards a more inward life, who want to live better, healthier, cleaner, you're going to tend to do that. it's just the nature of things. You will tend to think like the people you are with. I remember when I started shifting gears from relationships I had from high school and college to newer relationships, I recognized that when I was around certain people, I got into these certain kind of thought patterns. When I was around certain family members, like my grandmother was super anxiety-ridden about everything. You know, if it started to rain, don't go anywhere because you're going to die in a car crash. I would get caught up in those things. When I was around people who were sad and depressed, this is one of the reasons why I had to stop doing some of the personal work that I would do with people, natural health work, because I would get so much into what they were experiencing as I was trying to help them that I would become overwhelmed with grief and sadness. I had to learn to be stronger. The people you work with, they influence you, your family members, your friends, but I said mentally and physically. So yes, they're the people you're in physical proximity with. But like I discussed this morning, we are in mental proximity now by joining together to study karma, to meditate together. So when you are attuning to individuals and choosing to be like people that are more clearer, you will tend to experience that. When I thought about interacting with people, you know, early on, it was Melissa, Roy Eugene Davis. I had a few friends that were meditators, but that was about it. Those are the people I attuned to. And because of that, I had greater clarity. I had greater sense of purpose. And when I would start kind of thinking about, you know, people whom I had troubles with or people who were in a lot of difficulty and couldn't get out of it, I started to think that way. So you have to remember your karma is contagious. You will tend to share experiences with the individuals that you relate to. It doesn't mean you have to abandon everybody, but if you are not strong enough to maintain a state of clarity, you might have to work on that. You know, early on, early on for 5 years, I cut off all relationships pretty much with everyone, just so I could focus on meditation. I spent time with Melissa and Roy and a few other people. But then after that 5-year period, I recognized I was stronger. So I could go into situations with family members who were extremely anxious, or I could go spend time with people who just wanted to play darts and drink beer at the bar. And it wasn't bothering me because I developed an inner strength. And I was able to maintain that state of clarity. I was not essentially attuning to them. As Sri Yukteswar said, you eventually become so strong that this clarity kind of exudes from you. And then when you get in their space, they are more benefiting from you versus you being influenced by them. So karma is contagious. And finally, your life is an adventure. You can't control everything. Sometimes there are good surprises, sometimes there aren't. Your purpose is to realize that you are the adventurer and not the things that happen during the adventure. I can't say what's going to happen to you in this life. I can't say what's going to happen to me in this life. I can have a general idea, and for the most part, those ideas have worked out generally, but their specific expression I could not have ever imagined. Where I am now, it's where I had imagined being in regards to the general idea of it, but the specifics of it are radically different. It's okay. It's fine. It's worthwhile. Things are going to go wrong. Things are going to go good. But you have to remember that the whole purpose of this is to let that karma exhaust itself. Let the good come, let the bad come, let it go. Do your best to live in harmony with the principles of yoga. And in doing so, you will start to recognize that you are this essence, this witness, this adventurer, which feels the grief, which feels the love, which experiences the light, which experiences the inertia. And the more you become aware of yourself being that, then you are no longer defined by it, and you are actually free of karma. And then you've broken the cycle of rebirth. Then you become the center of it all, the center of it all. And you don't have to come back and live in 2021 with all the issues of 2021, nor do you have to reincarnate in the 1940s during World War II, nor do you have to incarnate in the 24th century so that you can travel around on a starship. You're free of it. And so then you continue to these subtler realms. And these subtler realms we can't talk about, I can't describe. You can only experience them through the practice of yoga. And then what you see and experience here in a way becomes like what your life was when you were a child. You remember it, it's there, but it doesn't have a whole lot of bearing on what you're up to, what you're capable of, what you're doing. So while karma can be understood in all these ways, and this is a useful model to have, we have to remember that it is really the engagement of yoga practice and the teachings of yoga and the lifestyle of yoga which frees us from the need to have this model. So contemplate all of this. Take some time with it. You might have to revisit it. There's a lot here. And we will look at some questions now, just for a few minutes.